When I was 20 years old, I had a close friendship with Carla, a girl as fascinated by the paranormal as I was. We met at university and often got together to have fun. This was about 12 years ago. One day, Carla bought a mystical board. It wasn't just a simple Ouija. It was different, with words, photos, symbols, and it came with a book that explained how to use it and interpret the messages. Carla and I spent hours trying to communicate with the other side, but with little success. One night, Carla took the board to her aunt's house, Elena, and apparently, they had an incredibly intense experience. So Elena, intrigued and perhaps a bit scared, asked Carla to leave the board with her for a few more days. Carla agreed, and we planned to visit her aunt later to have a session together, including Elena, of course. It was a Saturday night. I remember passing by Carla's house, and as we headed to Elena's house, a sense of unease began to creep over me. Although I had already had some encounters with the inexplicable, this time something told me that what we were about to do was really dangerous. We arrived at Elena's house. She was a beautiful woman. I remember having seen her a few times before, but her face was very pleasant to look at. That night she greeted us with a coldness that made me even more nervous. From the threshold of the door, I felt a chill run down my spine. The house seemed enveloped in an oppressive atmosphere. Elena, with a serious look, led us to the dining room where she had placed the board. What I saw astonished me. The board, which used to be colorful and vibrant, was now covered in a layer of fine dust and looked older than I remembered. We sat around the table, and Elena, in a solemn tone, explained that she had tried to use the board alone the previous night and had felt a very strong presence. I shuddered, looked at Carla, who seemed distressed, but still decided to try it together. We placed our hands on the oracle and immediately I felt a strange energy, though at that moment I thought I was influenced by what was happening. We started the session and my heart began to beat faster immediately. Almost at the same time, the oracle began to move slowly, spelling out words we didn't understand. Carla, with a trembling voice, asked if there was someone with us. The oracle moved quickly to yes. Elena, with a concerned expression, told us we had to be careful with our questions. Suddenly, all the lights in the house flickered and finally went out. We were left in darkness, only illuminated by the dim light of the candles Elena had lit as a precaution. The oracle began to move frantically, spelling out words at a speed we couldn't keep up with. I felt an intense cold around me and knew that something was not right. Elena, in an urgent tone, told us we had to close the session. We tried to move the oracle to goodbye, but it seemed to resist, as if something or someone didn't want to let us go. Carla started crying, terrified, and I felt fear paralyze me. Finally, with a joint effort, we managed to close the session. Elena looked at us with a seriousness I had never seen in her before and said, "No, they don't like it. You'd better leave now." We left her house that night, still trembling. Carla was distraught and told me she had never seen her aunt act like that. We decided it was best to get rid of the board, but before doing so, Carla wanted to try one last thing. We took it to the local park and buried it. Since that night, we never did anything like that again. We set aside our fascination with the paranormal. Every time I think about it, I feel immense fear and realize that there are things. From months ago, I had a few scary experiences, but this one is probably the scariest and still brings me to tears. So, I lived in my aunt's house after she moved out, and we had a lot of paranormal activity for years. My closet door would open fully, and I would feel someone staring at me. There were eerie noises, like hangers flying through the house. Whatever it was, It seemed connected to my cousin at one point, but only I could see it. A few years later, we moved to the countryside. I got into spirituality and felt really connected with nature at this point. But aside from the ghost, or whatever it was years prior, I kept feeling like I was being watched and even saw shadows sometimes. One night, I was going to sleep late after watching TV on the couch. I went to my room and was just staring at the window. All of a sudden, I turned to my door, which had a night light shining down by the crack at the bottom. I heard the floor creak. I looked down and saw 2 feet walk in front of my door and slowly turned to face me. I just froze. I knew my dad had already gone to sleep and I could hear him snoring. I felt a dark energy. At this point, I was trying not to cry, and I called my ex. I kept him on the phone and eventually fell asleep. This wasn't the end though. I came back from my friend's house, and they left to get some stuff so we could go to the lake. I was in the bathroom when I suddenly heard a growl. My dogs were outside asleep on the other side of the house, so I thought, what the heck? Not only did I hear a growl, I also heard a whisper. Then I heard scratching sounds. I opened the door and heard nothing, so I went back to the bathroom and closed the door. I heard it again, but louder. I tried to record a video, but nothing came up, even though it kept whispering in my ear and growling. At this point, I was really scared, so I called my friends and asked them if they could hear it. They said no. I told them to get here immediately. When they arrived, I ran out of the house as fast as I could. I'm extremely connected to anything spiritual. At the time, I wasn't even practicing or knew how to, but I had crystals and some old spell books. I was also trying to figure out my family history. I had crows following me everywhere, too. I just thought maybe I was being watched over. Whatever was after me in my previous house, I felt like it followed me to the new one. I ended up doing a cleansing and didn't have any activity for a while. Here's where I messed up. Like I said, I lived in a very old rural area in the woods. One day, I was with my family on an ATV ride and we discovered a very old cemetery. Dating back to the early 1800s, I saw a grave with a mother and her 3 kids. They all died at birth or within a year, from influenza. As shown on the grave, I decided to clean it off. The grass was cut because it was beside a church that wasn't used often but was kept up. As I was cleaning off the grave, I felt sympathy for the mother, so I started talking, saying I was sorry and explaining, "Hey, I'm just cleaning off the graves." All of a sudden, I had blood pouring down my leg. There were huge scratch marks running down my leg. I whispered, "I'm sorry," and ran to my dad to tell him. He doesn't really believe in this stuff, but he looked scared. We immediately left. I never had a problem or even saw the mother or her kids in ghost form again. To this day, I'm scared to open up to my spiritual side. These encounters involve my siblings from time to time, but for some reason, I was always the one who saw or experienced these things. It scares me so much. My grandmother told me something that happened to her when she was young, and it still sends shivers down my spine when I think about it. She lived with my grandfather and my newborn father in a secluded house in the countryside. At that time, she had a very close friend whom she met while they were both working at a school. Over the years, they maintained their friendship as they raised their children and became strong and resolute women. My grandmother's friend had a younger brother who had returned to the town where they lived a few years earlier after divorcing his wife. My grandmother got to know him as well, and they were friends for a long time. One day, her friend's brother contacted my grandmother in a moment of deep sadness, looking for someone to talk to. She had just given birth to my father and had to take care of him and feed him, so she couldn't visit him at that moment. After talking with this friend for a while and explaining everything, he told her everything was fine. not too worrying. Finally, he said, "Then I'll see you soon." That day, my grandfather was working the night shift, so my grandmother wasn't expecting him to return home until the next morning, nor was she expecting any visitors. Around 9 p.m., she heard the front door of the house open. It was a large and quite noisy door, designed to alert them when someone approached. At first, she thought it might be my grandfather, perhaps sent home early or having forgotten something in his haste to leave. However, the situation took an unexpected turn when their family dog started to tense up and growl fiercely toward the door, as if it had detected something threatening. Max had always been a friendly and patient dog, especially with children. Seeing him act like this alarmed my grandmother, who tried to get up to investigate. If maybe someone was at the door, but she found herself inexplicably unable to move. A cold sensation enveloped her, despite the warm glow of the nearby fireplace. For agonizing minutes, she felt paralyzed in her chair as the tension in the room grew. Finally, as the cold began to dissipate, she experienced a strange calmness and serenity. It was then that she heard the sound of the front door opening again, as if something had happened. The next morning, when my grandfather returned home, she told him what had happened and about the strange incident with the door. To her surprise, he had devastating news to share. The brother of my grandmother's friend, the man who had sought comfort that same night, had tragically passed away in his home shortly before 9 p.m. That night was not a common accident. It was a sudden and mysterious event that left everyone puzzled. The coincidence of the events, the unsettling presence, and my grandmother's strange sensation, along with the dog's reaction to something invisible, left my grandmother deeply disturbed for a long time. To this day, the story persists in our family, a reminder of the inexplicable and mysterious aspects that may exist beyond death.